I'm Ari Kirstein. I'm the president of the WBA, and on behalf of the Williams-Boston Association, I want to welcome everyone to our event this evening, and thank you for coming. We're very lucky to have Yng-Ru Chen, class of 2000, and Veronica Roberts, class of 1998, with us tonight. They're going to discuss their experiences and expertise in the art world with us. So we're very happy to have both of them. So I just want to extend a thank you to Ing and Veronica for being here with us tonight. They're going to go ahead and have a discussion, and they will take questions. So I just want to let you all know that if you use the chat feature during the event and enter questions, they will do their best to get to them as they go. And if there's a little bit of time, they might loop back at the end and answer an additional question or two, but please ask questions as we go. And Ing and Veronica will attend to them. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Ing and Veronica and go ahead.
Thank you, Ari.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being here tonight. If you hear a dog in the background at any point, that's my new doggie. I think that's like the COVID thing to do, is to get a dog. So full disclosure that I have one behind me. And Ing, I'm so happy to be in conversation with you after the inaugural week of your new gallery opening, which is just incredibly thrilling. To open a business during a pandemic and in the best part of Boston, an amazing neighborhood. So I can't wait to, this is kind of an excuse for me also to get the scoop and hear about more of the background of how that started. So I know we'll talk about our Williams experience, but I wanted to just, for folks who don't know you, could you talk a little bit about what you've just done in this past week and what the name of the gallery is and where that came from?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Ing, and thank you, Veronica. Thank you, Ari. I see so many old friends. Thank you, you guys. And even my friend and our artist, James Clark, who's not a Williams alum, is here from Tokyo. So that's awesome. So I graduated, or I'm class of 2000 from Williams College, and I am originally from the Boston area. I'm from Brookline. I was born in Taipei, but I grew up here starting from the age of 5. And I actually just recently moved back to Brookline in 2019 after spending about 20 years in New York working in the arts. And I never, ever intended to open a gallery. Like, zero, some of you are on here have known me for half my life, and you will vouch for the fact that I never spoke about opening a gallery. That just wasn't my thing. And I think a lot of that was because, being a New Yorker, you can't really figure out how you would have the means to open a gallery. So I was working in all these other ways in other capacities with artists. And I started my company called Praise Shadows Art Partners in 2018. And that was a company that I founded to help artists navigate the art world in terms of finding revenue streams separate from the art gallery and art sales system. It just seemed to me around that time that, especially in New York, even if you were an artist who had museum shows, had gallery representation, or were in biennials, I still had artists coming up to me and saying, I need some help. I need some extra revenue. I need to make some money outside of these art sales, or my gallery is closing. And so I have a lot of experience in the museum world. I worked at several museums. I worked at Sotheby's auction house, and I worked at a design company where I licensed artworks from artists for products. And I kind of saw that there were all of these different economic models for how fine art could find its way and create a more viable, sustainable economy for artists. And so I started the company thinking, you know what, I'm going to just start working with some artists and work on creating commissions and partnerships and not worry about the gallery system. And that was great until COVID hit in March. And all of these deals that I have been working on, with big company in Germany, like exhibitions between London, New York, and LA, that all just stalled. And then I have 2 young children, so I spent the spring really just helping them with school and figuring what we were going to do with our lives. And so the idea of the gallery only started to happen when I was spending a lot of time over the spring and summer speaking with colleagues like Veronica and other museum curators and directors and artists, and trying to really understand where we all were at this point with COVID. And then, you know, George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. And that all kind of magnified in my head as I started to think, you know, I want to do something, like I have a point of view on all of this. And I know so many artists who also have great things to say. It would be really cool if I had a place to do it, which is ironic because, you know, we're in this social distancing era. But what happened was I was walking through my neighborhood, which is the Coolidge Corner neighborhood of Brookline. My children go to school 1 block away, and a storefront was up for lease. I just happened to meet the tenants next door. They were like, your landlord, our landlord's amazing. He's the best. You got to talk to him. So it went from me just kind of thinking, and this is July, this is how recent it was, thinking, oh, maybe it could be kind of a fun pop-up idea, to having a meeting with a landlord who he's just he's probably in his 70s, this old school Italian guy. He's owned the building for decades. And he looks at me, he goes, you got to believe in yourself. You wanted me to do the gallery. And I just kind of went, okay, believe in myself. And I didn't know how much commercial rents were in that neighborhood. They're historically very high. It's a very, very highly trafficked area. Public transportation, all the museum directors in the Boston area live in this neighborhood. You know, it just made sense because there was no there was no visual art, but there's this humongous bookstore that just keeps expanding. There's this classic movie theater from the 30s that, you know, sadly is not open right now, but will come back. There's a great vinyl shop a few doors down from me. So there was like all these cool indie cultural things, but no gallery. And so I started talking to the landlord. He really wanted me to have it. He turned down other offers. And he, even before we signed the lease, he gave me the key and the blueprint a month before I signed the lease. He just kind of went, go for it. I know. And so only because of a landlord like him was I able to create this kind of space. And it's not like as if I was going through Boston trying to find a space for a gallery. It literally was the community. And that's really important to me because, you know, I live there. My children walk home from school 1 block away and just come. Today I was there, but the gallery's not open on Monday. But my daughter and her friends all just came over after school. And, you know, it's just like a place now for them to feel like they belong. But what's really neat is we're showing artists from all over the world. So it's not just a place for local artists, even though, you know, that's great too, but we're showing people that I want to have some sort of representation in the city of Boston, which has some of the world's best museums, and, you know, I think is worthy of some of the world's best art as well on the gallery level.
I love your story about the landlord, and also when you sent me the sort of deck before the gallery and told me the news. I love that he was listed as, like, you thanked him. He's like a contributor, considered sort of a supporter of the gallery, but
he's the best. He's like, the Boston Globe is coming out with a story about the gallery on Friday, and I must have talked so highly of him that the reporter was like, can I interview your landlord? So you might get a little quote from him on Friday. But he's, you know, like all of his businesses really for the most part stay where they are. Like, you know, they are not companies that go in and out. He turned down an ATM in place of the vinyl record shop a few years ago. You know, this is someone who just cares more about the people that are there over the profit. And I, you know, again, I'm not saying that this doesn't happen in New York, but I just couldn't have taken that risk in New York. And so this was totally a COVID era project, without a doubt.
Yeah. No, but I think that's interesting what you're saying about the landlord too, just in the sense of, I have another friend, also a mom. She's a mom of 4, which is kind of amazing. And she was thinking about opening a gallery in San Francisco, but the rents are really high and she does not have any financial backers. And her story is very similar to yours. As soon as she started thinking, like, the very first property she saw just turned out to be so perfect. And the landlord really wanted like a parent and somebody who was like a young entrepreneur, and sort of gave it to her below market rent. So she ended up like opening a gallery within a month of like like thinking she would, you know, or
Yeah.
thinking about the idea, not
Yeah.
even thinking she would. But I
Yeah.
think it also speaks to having lived in New York, because I too spent about 20 years in New York, and I watched as certain neighborhoods went from independent bookstores and coffee shops to just all Verizon, or, you know, banks and Verizons. And I think if you want neighborhoods to be interesting, you've got to, you know, you need to also not just pay the highest bidder sometimes. And I'm envious though that you're in a walking city, because Austin is not as much of one. And I think that's also important for your business. But
I agree. And I think, you know, there are clusters of neighborhoods in Boston that are very much art centric and like kind of designed or developed to be that way. There's one in South Boston or south of Washington called SOA. And, you know, there are good galleries there, but it's just really hard to get to without a car or, you know, if you don't live right near there. So for me, it was like, you can take a T if you want, or if you live nearby, come walk. I mean, there's a curator from one of the museums. She rode her bike, you know, over from Cambridge. It's not hard. If you go to one of the Cambridge schools, there's a bus, or you know, you can just like you can drive really easily. And we're 7 minutes from the Gardner Museum and from the MFA. Like it is really so easy, even though it's technically not in the city of Boston. But you can come if you like you grab your pizza on a Friday night, or before you go to the movie, before you go pick up your books at the bookstore, or you go pick up your toilet paper, you can just like hop in and go see art. You know, like I don't think it should be a thing. I don't think it should be a big deal. I think that going to see art should just be like going to see, you know, the book that you want to buy at the bookstore. And, you know, we'll get into it later, kind of the concept of the store and the gallery as well. But that's important to me, that everyone feels like they can hop in and have a look and walk out if they want, but they shouldn't feel intimidated.
Yeah. One of my dreams for the Blanton, I'm the curator of modern and contemporary art for the Blanton Museum in Austin, which is connected to the University of Texas. But one of my dreams is that we're open more evenings so that people can just like, it will be mostly driving, not walking like your gallery, but to be able to just have that experience of like, you know, going to the museum because that's what I did in New York. On Friday nights when I finished up work, I would go to the Met, I would go to just one gallery, I would have a glass of wine on the balcony and, you know, eat whatever little snacks and stuff and then call it a night, because Friday was always like my low key night and that was my ritual. And I would love to see that happen. But so I did ask you though about the name. I want you to share where the name came from for the
Yeah.
gallery.
So everyone who's a Williams person, I got the name from my class at Williams College. I took a Japanese architecture class my junior year. And unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the lecturer. She was a visiting professor, so I can't remember her name, and I don't have any of my records. But it was a class on Japanese architecture. I absolutely loved it, and we read this book, In Praise of Shadows. And you know, I read it, and it's very just small. I mean, it's only about 50, not even 50 pages. And it's an essay from 1933 by Tanizaki. It was first published and in 33 and then translated into English in the 70s. And then I believe it was excerpted in The Atlantic until they published it as a book. But it's really this beautiful little book about aesthetics and but really also about how we perceive culture and how we perceive beauty according to our cultures. And Tanizaki was writing this at a time when Japan was kind of entering into this age where, you know, homes are becoming lit with electrical light, and you know, things are just becoming more westernized and modern. And so there's a little bit of a lamenting of, you know, kind of the older, he's a bit of a curmudgeon, like he's definitely a bit of a curmudgeon, but it really informed me about how I think about art and how I value art and the way that people come to it from their worldviews and from their perspectives. So I read it, I loved it, and I didn't really think about it that much until I was at Sotheby's. I was a Chinese art specialist at Sotheby's, and the worldwide head of Chinese art was this super like he just had this beautiful aesthetic. All of his catalogs were stunning and sumptuous, and like kind of you just wanted to hold it. And he did this catalog on Chinese scholars' rocks, and they were lit so beautifully. And we were talking about the photography, and he said, "My favorite book is In Praise of Shadows," and we both just kind of went, "Oh my God," because it's like when you find that person that it's just that it's like it's not a secret, of course, but it's not something that everyone talks about. And so I realized that it was a special thing. And as I was thinking about naming the company, I was thinking about the whole notion of creating opportunities for artists beyond what we normally expect of them and of what the model is, because I was doing things around the gallery system. So one of my favorite quotes from the book is, "If it were not for shadows, there would be no beauty." And I think that's absolutely true. Like there are a lot of cultural takes in here about how important darkness is in Japanese aesthetics, and or like when it's dark and you see the golden like kind of seams from the ceramics or from the scroll, it makes it so much more powerful. That was something that resonated with me, and I wanted to kind of bring that essence to what I was doing with artists. So thank you to Williams College. This is the book. And it's funny because I carry this book at the gallery, and I swear I'm going to be like the gallery that, like how that Fleetwood Mac song Dreams is like the top hit after, however many decades. Everyone's coming in and buying this book, which I love, which I really, really love. So I hope everyone reads it. I mean, it's kind of a weird, quirky book, but I will say some of the best and most, incredible artists around the world cite this book as a major influence. So like David Ajayi, cites this all the time when he talks about his architecture, and James Turrell cites this all the time when he's talking about his light work. So I highly recommend it.
So beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to talk just a tiny bit about Williams too, because we were talking about it earlier today, and I was thinking about the ways that you always hear about the Williams art mafia. There's been when you say you're from Williams to other people in the art world, they're like, oh wow, they know the reputation. And what I think is interesting though is that for me, and I don't know how you feel about this, Ing, it was less like opening doors, because I would think I was just so naive when I graduated. I didn't think that somehow like I wasn't going to call Glenn Lowry at MoMA and ask to work there. And that's not how I would have, I ended up working at MoMA at one point, but he had nothing to do with that. Right. And he had no say in my being a curatorial assistant. I don't think that position mattered enough. So in a funny way, I don't think like the traditional notion of networking is something that I took advantage of or really, tried to harness. But I think for me, just the emphasis on writing and just the rigor of the program, and for me was just such a gift, and the way that we were taught art history, and also I was thinking about just the access to Williams College Museum, because at the time I just never really understood that a museum could be something, I think it really opened my eyes to a museum feeling like it was my own space, and feeling really comfortable in it, and feeling like, oh, this is something I could imagine wanting to do for, possibly for a career.
Did you go into college knowing you wanted to study art history, or that you wanted to work in the art world?
No, I actually was going to be a French major. And then I remember the French department was really weak. And at the time, and I ended up taking some French classes, but honestly, within 2 days of Art History 101, 102, I was like, this is going to be my major. Yeah. And actually I still have, because I'm such a pack rat / archivist, depending on how you want to phrase it, I still have my exam from 101, 102, where Ava Gruden says, you really need to be a major, and like, we want you to be a major. It was like the nicest, I just was so into that class. And actually my senior year, a group of us who lived on Hoxie Street, we all just went back to 101, 102. And the rest of those people all became like bankers and consultants. And my friend's a doctor in Portland. She's like in the healthcare industry. And we all just sat in with our coffees in the back and just like watched it all over again.
I agree. I mean, I come from an immigrant family. I come from parents who did not have, and let's say, I mean, studying art is a luxury,
Right.
it's definitely a luxury. It is not something that you like seek to do if you are, if your parents don't know anything about it. And my parents
Yeah.
really didn't. Even though like I, attended public school in Brookline and I played music and that was a huge part of my life, but visual art, and I'm a terrible artist. So it wasn't like I was an artist who wanted to study art history. So I actually thought I was going to be a psych major. And then
Hmm.
I don't know, I didn't love it. So I didn't start taking art history until my sophomore year. But you're right, it was the same feeling like sitting in that lecture hall and just realizing how much I learned about the world through visual culture. And I can't say enough about how rigorous the training was, and the writing, the education, and but also having people like you. I mean, we were in different classes, grades, but some of you guys I was definitely sat next to during our history class, and like, we all loved it. We just loved it. And it was also amazing that at Williams you could be a total jock and be an art history major. And I will say I know this to be true because I also attended another university where it was very jock cultured, and you weren't necessarily welcome to study a discipline like art history if you were a major athlete, and which I also was, right? But what I loved about Williams was like you could be the captain of the football team or the hockey team or whatever, and still say, yeah, I'm going to study art history and math and econ. I mean, it was just like everyone could do anything. But it was the well-roundedness that I really loved. And, we all came out of it doing so many different things. Like there actually aren't that many of us who are still working in the arts despite having studied art history. I mean,
Sure.
honestly, like you and I don't know. I don't know who else. I mean, you and I
I
from
can think of a few people, Ethan Lasser.
yeah,
Anyway, I can,
of course, yeah. I mean, there's
yeah,
certainly a few people, but like out of all these people who major in art history, you go
sure.
on to do all the other things, and it's like, but I remember because I'm not Christian, but I learned so much about Christianity in Art History 101. I could suddenly, and I remember going to the Gardner Museum. Oh my God, my first time going to the Gardner Museum after taking Art History 101, that blew my mind because I realized that I lived in the city where every single painting I studied was basically right there.
Right.
And that was just incredible, to also make that connection between like where I'm from, the resources that I have, the cultural resources that I have, and then what my professor chose to teach me. That was
Yeah.
incredible. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But in terms of the art mafia, I mean, you and I both spent time at MoMA. We were there at approximately the same time. I was at PS1, but I was there a lot, and I actually had lots of meetings with Glenn. He didn't help in the hiring process at all either. And he wasn't necessarily someone who was like, oh, fellow Williams person, that's,
Mhm.
like get you moving up the chain here at all. But I do remember my first internship at Sotheby's, and the woman who was hiring, for better or for worse, I mean, it benefited me, but she only chose 5 schools to recruit from because
Wow.
of the rigor of the art history program. And Williams was one of them. And, it was kind of like I already passed the test because that was where my diploma was from. But, otherwise, the art mafia, I feel like it's like so many generations before us.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you would say that to somebody now in their 20s, if that
Hmm.
even resonates or applies. What do you
Yeah.
think? I mean, do you hear people talk about it anymore?
I mean, the one thing I don't know if people talk about it as much from, yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. I feel like, I don't know. I'd have to ask if there's anyone on this call who's more clued in to that or not. But I do think it's helpful to see, like the first few years that I was in New York, I would come back to Williams almost every year for like, just because I liked coming back. But I also would talk to like, when you're low on the totem pole in the art world, I think it's actually really helpful for like people who are graduating to talk to someone who's only like a step or two ahead of them, right? As opposed to Glenn Lowry talking to them, which is, fantastic that he's the director, but not maybe as helpful.
Yeah.
So I did that quite a bit. And even if people weren't going to end up pursuing, just so that they knew they had someone to ask questions of too, just even someone to bounce ideas off of or find out what options there might be. But yeah, and there was a woman, I have to say also the mentors that you have early in your career, it's interesting to me how many of those mentors that I had like the first 3 years I was in New York have been my mentors forever. And so there was this one woman, she just recently stepped down from the Whitney, but she was the director of education at the Whitney. And I applied for an internship out of college. I'd actually only been to New York once in my life, and it was one night from Williams to see a musical with the Black Student Union. Long story why I was a member of the Black Student Union, but anyway, that was the only time I'd ever been to New York. And then I just moved there because I got this internship, but she loved to hire Williams students also. It wasn't a requirement by any means, but she just really liked Williams students. And she was such a great mentor. I ended up interning in the education department. And she helped me get the job that I have now at the Blanton 20 years later. Like she's just she also helped me when I was at Crossroads and like, my boss got fired at the Whitney and I didn't know what to do. And she's like, well, there's this amazing audio guide company. And she just opened my eyes to what else was out
audio guide company. I remember you worked for them. That's right.
Yeah.
No, and I remember seeing you at the career, forums. And I think I joined you on one at one point when I was, I just recently graduated. I mean, the thing about Williams is that it's funny because when I was about to matriculate at Williams, I like took a summer job, doing retail at the mall or something. And the person who was hiring me, like, didn't know. I'm sure many of you have had this experience. They're like, oh, where's Williams or William and Mary or, I mean, like all the other Williams, but Williams College. And so it's almost kind of like this book, it's like, oh, well, if that's okay, but it's definitely a very special thing to have. And, actually, I will say, like, I've actually met quite a few Williams people that have done the master's program in art history. And, so that's like a nice tie-in as well in the industry. And there's some great museum directors and museum curators who have come out of that program. And even though we weren't there at the same time, we still share kind of that connection. And, one of the things that I'm excited about too is there's an artist that is showing in my next group show, and he went to Williams. And I didn't know him, but we met standing in line last December at Art Balls on Miami Beach, and we were waiting, and turned out he was a few years behind me at Williams, and now he's creating works for the show that's coming up. And but he's like, we couldn't have come from more different worlds, but because of that connection, it all kind of filtered into this really wonderful relationship. So
I like that. And one thing that I think about also when I try to put myself back into that like recent Williams graduate land, thinking about the world and so unaware of what jobs were even like existed also, I feel like it takes some time. Like you said, you worked at Sotheby's before, MoMA, like that never even dawned on me to do work at an auction house. That seemed really daunting and scary. And I don't know, somehow that was very intimidating. It wouldn't have even dawned on me to try to do something like that. But I also think about how I was very focused on living in certain cities at that moment in my life. And I really thought, okay, Bay Area, where I'm from, and New York. And like, I was so closed-minded. I spent summers in other places, like just, I was open to being somewhere else. But I think one of the best career decisions that I made for myself was to leave New York and to go to Austin. And it's been the most rewarding of all. I mean, I loved the jobs I had, but I think I look back and I also wonder if I had been a little bit more open-minded about, where I worked in Indianapolis for a little while. It's like sometimes the best experiences are not necessarily at the most prestigious institutions. It's about who your mentor or your boss is, or how much responsibility you get. And so I try to like mention that to people too. Although I do think working at a huge institution at some point in your life is actually very beneficial, just because you learn you learn so much from that experience. It's kind of like de facto training, you know?
It really is. I mean, you know, and New York, I mean, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like New York. I'm super happy I spent 20 years there, but I am so happy I'm not there right now. And I'm really happy that, you know, I'm able to bring what I know and what I care about to a community and to like an equally vibrant city that has, like you know, been saying a lot, has great museums, I mean, and great culture, but it doesn't have to be defined by New York. And I think that's one of the things that, you know, the COVID pandemic really hit home for a lot of people, is as more people started leaving the city of New York as well, and kind of going and, you know, setting up kind of either home or temporary home or going back home to other places, is, you know, the richness of all of these other places, you know, all these other cities. I was talking to Jose Carlos Diaz at the Warhol, you know, he's in Pittsburgh and is really committed to creating, you know, a culture and a community there that is serving that population. It was actually Jose who said, you know, we're looking more regionally at what we do and who we show. And all I could think of was like, okay, great. You know, now maybe, you know, here in Boston, the museums are not necessarily going to always go to New York to look for things. You know, they can look here. Not that they haven't, but, you know, I think historically New York has just taken such a big part of the pie. And now, you know, as more of us are kind of leaving and deciding to, you know, set up our futures, you know, in other places and really committing to it, I think it makes a huge difference. But actually, someone has a question about Wide Awakes. Can we go and show some images of what's happening at the gallery?
That'd be great.
Okay. Because I also know that we'll probably want to talk about some other things afterwards as well. But I just wanted to quickly show everybody what we have going on. Can you guys see the screen okay?
Yeah, it looks good to me.
Okay. So this is the book. And this is the quote: "Were it not for shadows, there would be no beauty." So the first exhibition that we showed that is currently on view is called Chosen Family. And it's by a Providence-based artist named Jared Key. Jared created these works. Basically, we had a studio visit online in August, and these works were installed on Tuesday. So it's a very fast process. They're all paintings, oil paintings on cement. And Jared is from Alabama originally, and is also queer, and chose to create portraits of members of their chosen family who are also all queer Black folks. And so this is Jared's self-portrait here. One of the most incredible paintings that Jared created is this triptych, which is pretty large. You might be able to see it, I think, in a later image, kind of in the installation. But this is an image of the 4 members of their chosen family in this composite landscape. And one of the reasons why Jared chose cement as their canvas was because Jared would ask people, particularly non-Black people, you know, close your eyes and imagine a Black person. Where do you see them? Where is that Black person? And the responses were often, well, I see Black people on the street. I see them on the basketball court. I see them hanging on the sidewalk, or I see them in prison. And for Jared, someone who grew up in Alabama, this was so far from where their notion of home and belonging was. And so this kind of comes from a series originally called Leaving the City. And so it's these beautiful scenes of, you know, a Black body and a gorgeous landscape. And so this is the four of them in this imagined landscape, which is kind of a composite of these different places that they all belong. Here's a gallery shot. So you can see Jared here on the left, and then that landscape next to Jared is the woods behind their house in Alabama, which if you have to see it in person, it's basically like you can see the sparks coming off of it. Next to that is a friend called Dee, and Dee is from the prairies of Minnesota. So that's a prairie shot. And what's really cool, I love talking art history with Jarrett because their favorite artists are Klimt, Rousseau, and Alma Thomas. And, you know, the moment, yeah, you can I mean, and the Klimt is so obvious to me, particularly in some other shots. Here's a shot of the gallery the other day, and this is just what's so cute. There are all these little kids that go by all the time, and they're just, you know, staring in the window. And this was a GNC vitamin store as of June or July. So we completely gutted the place and, you know, just created a very flexible situation and installation environment for contemporary art. The next show is opening at the beginning of January. It's called See and Be Seen. And I've taken this work by a Boston-based artist named Catherine Mitchell DeRicco, and she creates these gorgeous light installations and just multimedia works that I think are wonderful and really kind of, you know, visceral. You have to be there in person. I actually went to elementary school with her. So, you know, we have this long, long connection. And she's been a working artist here in Boston for a long time. And we reconnected when I moved back last year. So I loved this piece that she had, which, you know, to me is like a contemporary take on the Vanitas painting, right? So this is like this tableau of, you know, little objects that means something to her and signifies something. But you're also taking this blue light and kind of changing the direction and the way that you look. So using this work, we're now looking at portraiture from a lens. Well, what does it mean to portray somebody or portray yourself in this new year? We've been through a lot. So I'll just show you some of the works that are coming up. So this is actually the Williams alum that I saw back at Art Basel Miami last year. His name is Miguel Payano, and Miguel actually has a studio practice in Beijing and in New York. And basically after graduating from Williams, just stayed in Beijing for a long, long, long time, but just finished his MFA at Hunter. So these are gorgeous portraits. Miguel, you know, there's a lot to say about this, but I'm really excited to show this. And you know, for Miguel and I to kind of like further our dialogue and develop our relationship a little bit more, especially with the Williams connection. And also that, you know, I also studied in Beijing and like we both speak Mandarin fluently. There's this whole cross-cultural reference. Miguel's also, you know, Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean, born in upper Manhattan, but, you know, spent half his life in China, is married to a China, like there's so much going on. And I'm really excited to kind of dissect that together with him. This is an artist named Madeline Donahue, who is also going to be in that show. And she's a painter as well as a ceramicist. People are just going nuts over her right now. I put her up on Instagram a few days ago and, you know, everyone's really, really, really excited about her. And she's really excited about this as well. She's a mom, little kids, has been so busy during the pandemic, just being a mom and trying to be an artist, but is making incredible work through all of this. And it's just looking at motherhood through this lens of humor and like realness, you know. So like she has babies like coming out of her like everywhere, and they're just pulling at her everywhere, but it's all like full of love and utter beauty. This is an artist who's based in the Boston area named Barbara Ishikora. And she actually, you know, went and got her MFA like later in life and had a whole career for 20 something years, and decided, I think she was in her 50s and she went to Mass Art and got her degree. But I think she's a fantastic painter, and she has this really interesting story. She's actually kind of just, you know, a Boston person, right? Like she's holding her like Bud Light, like I think there's like a Dunkin' Donuts in another painting, and she's smoking her cigarette. But then she married this like really refined Japanese man and lived in Japan for a long time, and always felt the pull of, you know, having to reconcile cultures that were so different and polar opposite. So these are these really, really funny self-portraits. She's always kind of like in her underwear, looking at herself in this comical way. This is Suchitra Matai, who is a Denver-based artist, and she's doing great. I mean, like Crystal Bridges just collected her, and Denver Art Museum has been collecting her. It's funny actually because she's originally from Guyana. Her family is Indian, but they were Guyanese, and then they moved to the United States. And the first place they stopped was Brookline, Massachusetts, which is so funny. Like when we did our studio visit, she goes, the first place I lived when I came to America was Brookline. But she is based in Denver, and all of these materials are vintage saris and vintage materials that, recall her background, the South Asian background, the Caribbean background. And this is just a lovely self-portrait. And then in February, we are going to be showing the first Boston exhibition of Duke Riley, who is a Boston born and raised artist, but has been in New York ever since graduating from RISD. Duke is incredible. And I know, Veronica, you are familiar with his work, but these are quote unquote scrimshaws, but really they're plastic remnants found from the ocean. And Duke has then taken all of these plastic items and created them to look like antiquated scrimshaws. And his whole practice is really looking at the relationship that human beings have with the water. We've known each other a really long time, and I'm so excited to show what he's going to do. This is just a little glimpse of the piece he's making specifically for the show, which is about the 1919 molasses disaster of Boston. And I'm sure most of you don't know anything about it, but it's this crazy story where like tons and tons and tons of molasses exploded in downtown Boston and actually killed quite a lot of people and damaged a ton of property. And so, this is something that's been kind of in Duke's practice for a while, just thinking about this disaster. He created an earlier work of this for the Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Boston, but they wanted it to be a specific color, which Duke was kind of like, well, that's not my thing, but if you wanted that color, this is your piece, I'll make it that color. This here that you see, this black and white, is very similar to his drawing motifs. So this is exactly what Duke has been wanting to create, but didn't have a chance to create last time. So this is a mosaic that he's been making. And then going back to these will be shown at a major New York museum in 2022. So we'll be basically premiering artworks that will then be going on view at this New York museum in a year. So that's super exciting, which basically means that, if somebody is lucky enough to collect this work, you have to promise to loan it to this museum and then you'll get it back. I think that's it for my little preview. I saw that somebody had wanted to ask me about the Wide Awakes event that I did in, I think, Heidi Vaughn. Hi, I'm just gonna take this over for a quick second. So the Wide Awakes is this event, this collective, or it's not even a collective, Wide Awakes is this movement that started in 1860, and it actually started in cities like Boston. I think the first city was Hartford, Connecticut. But they were an abolitionist movement that took to the streets, and there were these young men who would protest, and they helped President Lincoln get elected. And then after Lincoln was elected, they disbanded. What happened about a year ago is a group of artists, including Hank Willis Thomas, decided to kind of pick up this notion of the Wide Awakes again and create this, amorphous movement that can take place all over the world. Anyone can belong. As long as you believe in this, we can all be a part of it. And it was kind of hard to understand at first. I was talking to Hank and I said, well, what is the Wide Awakes? And he goes, the Wide Awakes is you. And I didn't really get it until I, kind of paid a little more attention. I realized, oh, as long as I wanted to activate something, I could be part of the Wide Awakes. We are all part of the Wide Awakes. And the whole premise is to wake up, to kind of open your eyes and see that there is something that you and I can all do to make change in the world. And clearly, this was a movement that was kind of triggered at the beginning of this year to help make change before the presidential election this year. So there was this huge contingent of the wide awakes in New York. And I decided in September to use this gallery space that I had just signed the lease for, and that I would give it over to the wide awakes for this anniversary weekend. So the anniversary of the wide awakes was 1860, October 3rd, 1860. So October 3rd, 2020, we opened up the gallery to anybody. And I had this amazing artist from Boston named Jamal Thorne create a mural on the wall. And then another amazing Boston artist named Ben Sloat created a couple of installations about public art and about what monuments mean to people. And then I ordered I think 1,000 posters from the Amplifier Foundation. So a lot of Shepard Ferry posters, protest posters, and we plastered them on the wall. And I basically said, come on in, grab a poster, learn what this is about, and let's try and just get people out to vote. Just get motivated and make things happen. And it was a gorgeous Friday night and Saturday. I mean, for a little storefront that I didn't do anything. I basically just tapped some posters on the wall. We had people draw on the wall. Some of you who are on here attended. We had hundreds of people come through, and people just kind of came in to learn for themselves what it was. But it was also great for me to see how the space could be activated for art. And by that, at that point, the demolition hadn't happened in the gallery. It still kind of looked crazy. It was like a hole in the wall. But no one cared. They were just so excited to engage with artists, and the artists were like, here, grab a marker, draw your own thing on the wall. And meanwhile, in New York on Wide Awakes Day, they had this whole parade from Brookline all the way uptown. So it was a really big deal. And there were chapters all over the world. Duke Riley, the artist I was just talking about, did a Wide Awakes Navy. So anyone who had a boat could just get on a boat. They made these banners, and they had, boat parades. And I think that the whole point of this is you can be a part of this. Art is not something that is for you to just passively enjoy and for the artist to tell you how to enjoy it. The whole process is for us to collectively enjoy this or be a part of it or figure out how we want to engage with it. And that, totally informs how I want the gallery to operate. I mean, it's still my operation, but I do want people to feel like, they can come in here and get something out of it, or even add something to it if they want to. So I hope that helps answer or speaks to the comment about Wide Awakes in October.
Absolutely. And I wanted to ask you, it was so great to see that presentation, because I knew some of those artists you had shared with me you were going to exhibit. But what I find exciting is that I don't know all of the artists. They're not all, I know some of them, but it feels like you're being really authentic to your own vision, but also making sure to choose some artists who are not just already showing with 3 galleries, and you're expanding what we can see out there in the world. And I think in some ways, the fact that you've had such an eclectic career and you haven't been 100% in the art world your whole career gives you a freedom that's actually really refreshing, and that we need more of, in the art world, to think beyond just the I really admire when.
Thank you. I mean, no, and I think curators like you are doing the same thing. And, I think also, though, it requires you to leave these centers of the art world. It also requires you to leave those media centers of the art world. When I was in New York, I didn't know about a lot of these art publications that exist in these regional cities. There's some great ones in Boston that I now have relationships with. I literally had never heard of them before, because my whole perspective was art forum, art those, and they really do cover kind of the same slew of artists. And meanwhile, the artists who are working and have been doing it for a long time, but they just aren't in that urban center, they totally deserve recognition in the same way. And part of me too is like, I think Boston's a really interesting city because there's so many schools. So many of the artists who come here are able to teach and have kind of these, sustainable careers, either whether they're tenured or not. I mean, I think most are not, but they have jobs and they then can have these, can have a life here where they're teaching and then maybe not like working on their practice as much, but trying to. Whereas in New York, there aren't as many teaching opportunities. And so you really do have to be like an artist and try and make it until you can't. And then, maybe you do something else or you leave. But it's just like a different kind of economy, honestly. Like it's a different work economy. And I don't think one is more or less valid than the other. It just means like there are other ways that people are being artists.
Yeah.
And I also like, it really irks me when, especially like women artists, and you have to be like 100 and almost dead or kind of basically dead for them to be like, oh, now we're so proud to have the retrospective of this woman artist who's never been shown before. I mean, I feel like that happens all the time now. And
Yeah.
you're just like, can't we just show these artists
Right.
while they're, still alive and kicking?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think about that in terms of, because I'm also showing artists in a different way, certainly, but I think about the power, the privilege that
Yeah.
holds. And I think it's interesting to be in a Texas museum because Austin, unlike other Texas cities, like for example, Houston is much more of an art center than Austin is. Houston is way more diverse. It's got deeper pockets, but it's also got cheaper real estate. So I would say that I go to Houston to kind of refill when I want to see lots of great shows. The ecosystem there is a lot deeper. Like I'm the only collecting institution in the whole entire town of Austin. Like the Blanton is it. There are other arts organizations, but we are the only collective. That's just, in Boston, you could name half a dozen. But the thing that I think that makes Austin special is that people like to visit. And so I think about that and I think, okay, what artists do people outside of Austin maybe not know? And who can I introduce them to? I do not want my galleries to look just like the Whitneys. I mean, I wish I had their budget and I wish I had a lot of their collection too, but you know what I mean? Like every museum should have. I like going to a museum and being introduced to an artist that I don't already know. And I don't want every museum experience to feel the same. So there are a couple folks like I could name that I'm really excited about. And I don't get so excited about discovering someone. Like to me, that's not like the thrill of like catapulting someone to fame. But I do think about how can I support artists that I believe in who are maybe don't have a gallery or are living in Pittsburgh and so they don't get the national exposure or living in San Antonio. So I do think about that. And
it's exciting. I actually meant to tell you, I did a studio visit this morning with Jari Miyana.
Oh yeah.
And sorry, so she's this incredible artist originally from the Dominican Republic. And she's been a resident at ISCP, on which I'm on the board, and she's been given a free studio. And ISCP has this really wonderful fund right now for New York-based artists who, have lost their studio spaces or don't have a place to work. And her career is just on fire. But one of the images she showed me was her installation at the Blanton. And when I saw that, I was so excited, and we talked about you a little bit. I know you didn't work with her as much directly. I believe it was another curator.
Yeah.
But, she and I are talking about doing a show together. And like, that would just be so exciting, right? Like here's an artist who I think, she's looking at art at kind of themes and, ideas of colonialism and and her drawings and her patterns are just so exquisite, but she's also so multidisciplinary. She can really do anything.
She's amazing. She's amazing.
An amazing artist and just so thoughtful. Anyway, but like the fact that she and I were talking about her practice in Bushwick, but then also talking about potentially doing a show in Boston, but then looking at her installation in Austin, and I thought that was great. I thought that, like, first of all, this is how we should be looking at artists today. Like it shouldn't just be, and thank God in a way for Zoom, like we can now make these connections beyond where we would normally go and make these studio visits. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, I'm excited about the prospects of that. Like, even though I'm zoomed out and often, certain days when you have 7 in a row, you just want to curse the
Yeah.
Zoom. But I do think it's leveling the playing field, and especially from like, I would love to do studio visits all over the country, but I mean, I just realistically can't get on a plane forever. You have to make decisions, and you still have to make decisions about your time.
Yeah.
But I do think it is really great to be able to have more exposure. It'll be really interesting to see how the landscape of artistic production changes. There's so many other things changing in the pandemic, but the fact that we're comfortable with this and with sharing ideas in this way is really interesting. And I started kind of an informal group with other, Texas is such a unbelievably huge state. So even though I've been here for almost 8 years, and I am a traveler and I get out and I go places, but it is still like, there are parts of Texas I've never been to, great institutions I haven't even set foot in. And so there's a bunch of us who started a kind of informal group during the pandemic to help each other out, and also just to get to know each other. And now we're doing we're collaborating on a year-long artist talk series with artists all across the state in the Rio Grande Valley. And it's actually just been an amazing way to get to do studio visits, because even within Texas, that's a daunting task.
Right. I mean, Texas is huge. But I mean, I think, you have just been doing such a brilliant job at the Blanton. And, I used to go visit Veronica almost yearly because of South by Southwest, where she would like try and get out of town. And but we would at least see each other like for 1 or 2 nights. But the Blanton is such a special place, and they're so lucky to have you. And I'm lucky that you were really like the mentor. I mean, the person I looked up to. You were, like I said, like, there aren't that many of us that are still continuing to work in this business, from our college days. And you and I have been lucky enough to have worked together alongside each other a few times, but and then even when not, just to continue to lift each other up. And I really appreciate you. You've been wonderful.
Oh, I feel the same about you. And I feel, yes, you hold on to certain people when you meet them in your life. You just hold on to them and then figure out how they'll intersect. And it's nice. Sometimes those things are sort of dormant for a while, or you're out of touch, and then suddenly people sort of resurface. So I'm looking forward to visiting the gallery as soon as
Thank you.
I feel like getting on a plane again.
I know. And if any of you on here are in the Boston area, please come visit. We're open Wednesdays through Sunday from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. But if you would like to have a private visit, you can email the gallery as well. And our email is on the website, which I put in the chat. But yeah, I mean, I'm so thankful for everyone for being here and listening to us talk about art for an hour, which I could do all day long. But and Ari, I wanted to thank you as well for inviting us and letting us be a part of this.
My pleasure. I definitely want to thank both of you again. That was a very illuminating discussion. We had some good audience engagement, and enjoyed learning. Definitely learned a lot I didn't know about the art world, and loved hearing your recollections of your time at Williams and some of the connections that you've maintained. So I really want to thank both of you again for your time. I want to thank Rob Swan, who's Williams Alumni Relations, who's kind of been in the background doing our Zoom tech this evening, making sure things run smoothly. And I want to say, for folks who joined us tonight, thank you for coming. If you want to know about future alumni events, you can go to alumni.williams.edu/virtual. And you'll see a listing of events there. And I'd certainly hope to see everybody at future events. And just once again, thank you, Yng, thank you, Veronica, for your time. And I hope everybody has a wonderful evening.
Oh, thank you, guys.
Bye.
Be in touch. Please keep in touch.